I'm Jussi Eronen. I'm at the moment working at the University of Helsinki at the Ecosystem and Environment Ecosystems Research Program and the Helsinki Institute of Sustainability Science, HELSUS. My background is actually in long-term studies of climate and nature and ecology. I'm coming from climate modeling and ecosystem, understanding the paleo ecosystem spanning from millions of years ago to the present. So that's where I began my career, and I have been moving slowly but steadily towards the present day and the future. So my thesis was on the Miocene or Neogene mammals and climate, which is like 20 billion years ago towards a couple of million years ago, that time span. And then I've moved towards the present day in different steps. And for the last, let's say, 6 or 7 years, or now 8 that we are in 2021, I've been working also with policy issues. That was a change in 2012 and 2013, where I became involved in this consensus statement business in California, where together with a bunch of colleagues, we ended up writing a kind of like this broad brush solution framework and background paper for the governor of California to help him steer the policy towards more sustainable issues. That was spearheaded by Tony Barnowski from Berkeley, nowadays in Stanford, and it was that. So that basically propelled me to this kind of new pathway towards sustainable studies. In the meantime, I've become also entangled in policy issues in Finland to do with this BIOS research unit that we established with 6 other colleagues in 2015, which is active in the Finnish policy discussions to do with science and science policy and how science should be taken into account in politics and policy design. So that's my broad background, and I've been working under kind of like fringes of Arctic and northern issues for the last 10 or a bit more, 10 years or a bit more. That it was early. That was mostly to do with ice age stuff and these kind of like the Arctic in temporal space. But more recently, I've become also involved in Arctic issues in the present. Well, Work Package 6 is this kind of the working tool for getting the input from other work packages and then molding it to something usable for the decision makers. It's not outreach or interaction, but it's kind of like the middleman in between the other work packages and interaction and policy guidance. So we try to make the science into synthesize the results and also discuss with stakeholders, and much of our work is organizing or was supposed to organize stakeholder workshops in different parts of Fennoscandia and also in Arctic Russia, although that's not my responsibility. It's under the Work Package 6, but I don't have that many connections to Russia, so Otto Habeck is responsible for those with Bruce to some extent. But those are to get the feedback and the feel from the local and indigenous groups and populations and what they think about this, and start the co-productive work. and then also feed other work package input into this mix and then shape outputs from that. We are still trying to haze out some kind of work schedule for the workshops. We have no idea at the moment to what extent we can organize them. It's clear that we can't organize large workshops which were visioned in the work plan, but we are in the next few months we are talking with the key people how we should organize these. I can perhaps take an example from my past actually to illustrate what it takes actually to get this working and why it's really challenging for Charter. I was in my first postdocs, I was working with climate modelers to actually fuse the data from mammals and from plant data, fossil data, together with climate modeling results and trying to kind of like combine those two fields. And I was working intensely with one climate modeling postdocs, and it took us 2 years to actually understand how we actually talk and what we mean by the different ways that when we communicate and say terms or jargon, use jargon differently. And so it takes a lot of kind of like being in the same place, daily interacting and working closely together and making mistakes and trying to and arguing a lot to actually make this work. And with this large consortium, it's a huge challenge because we have so many different voices, and then the COVID situation makes it even worse because we can't meet in person. We met early when we were planning this, but after that we haven't been able to meet together. So that's a huge challenge. And then there's of course Zoom and other ways of remote connections and interacting through web. They are not enough alone. So if this continues for a year or so in the future, then we have to really just try to make what we can from this, and then we just have to accept that this kind of integration that we are aiming is not going to be fully implemented. But there's still time, so although I'm slightly concerned, I'm not panicking yet. It's a kind of like placeholder. It's not really, I mean, it's one of these buzz terms that can mean many things, and it's on purpose vague because it can mean many things for different people. Usually it is thought, or one school of thought uses it to describe qualitative descriptions of future that are taking more of a story-like form. So it's not only quantitative data and flowcharts, but it's more kind of like basically somebody narrates it, right, the story and tells it, and it's kind of like trying to take the local and regional and individual populations more into account and understand what are important for their livelihood and success and for the future, how they cope, and trying then focus our research on those areas and kind of like look into those areas that are important for the stakeholders, because we produce a whole lot of data from different aspects and we can basically pick also certain aspects, and so we can concentrate on those which they think are important for the future. Of course, that has to be combined with kind of this ground vision and the climate change data and so on, but it's a combination of these towards different kinds of future visions, let's say. It can be, for example, that it's not important when is the first ice formed. That's not important for locals. It's when it actually is holding people and when you can actually go with a more snow wobbly through the fields or something like this. And then we have to somehow try to find from our data whether we can quantify those and vision how these conditions will change and so on. So it's co-productive measure towards the future. At least this is how I vision it. There has been a lot of discussion, especially in the climate change scene, that the IPCC results are not transferred well, that people need stories and understand how this change happened in a kind of like somehow storify it. That's been that the IPCC tale is not captivating if it's only includes data and charts and kind of like objective, kind of like ice will melt in 2025. It doesn't tell anything if you don't include what it means for local people, for nature, what the nature and people together, how they kind of like react, what is missed. There are also stories about how important, for example, ice is for indigenous and local communities in the north, how their whole worldview is changing if that is lost. So these need to be taken into account and also somehow communicated to the policy and in the state kind of like decision makers, so that they would understand what this really means on ground, but also on larger agenda. So it's the kind of like pathway narratives can be a lot of things, and we'll see what it forms out to be. But these are the kind of components what are involved. For example, last year and the year before, or 2019 and 18, for example, the Environmental Forum of Finland actually did two reports, different reports on the kind of like decision making and policy. And in one, there was kind of like a lot of information that there is that we need to differently format the science and communicate it in a different format. But then in the other report which was based on interviews from people from ministries and people who are actually preparing the legislation and so on, they said that there's a lot of information. We know all the information that there is, but the problem is that the politics is always about compromise, and the political process somehow is involved. And when you start the kind of like political deal making, then of course you have to give away something. So and that's not easy. And it's a process that is somehow sometimes messy, sometimes more direct. But so that's one aspect. But also for scientists, we have to be able to communicate our results more directly in easy to understand format, but be prepared to actually offer the kind of like the details if needed. And it is becoming more evident that this whole planetary system and also socio-ecological systems are complex systems. So to understand the dynamics, we have to be able to understand the different kinds of feedback loops, negative and positives from different systems to others, and also the thresholds that are surprising. And those are really hard to communicate to policy at the moment. I think it's getting better, but because those are new concepts and not easy to mold into kind of like political sentences or like 3 bullet points that are important, which you should actually include in the legislation. That's one challenge. So there are many of these. So there is no silver bullet, but we just need to work on different levels and use different means and just try to get the change happening.